The resolve was dying, but she would die fighting. Admiral Yoon Sirin stood on her command deck and watched the Keth cruiser growing larger on the main display, its weapons powering up for the bombardment that would murder millions of innocent Velthrani. Her own ship had taken enough damage to cripple any ordinary vessel 5 times over. Hull breaches had been sealed with emergency foam and desperate engineering. Life support was failing in 3 sections, and the crew had simply moved to sections where they could still breathe. The engines were running at capacities that should have been impossible, pushed beyond every safety limit by engineers who understood that limits did not matter when lives were at stake. Impact in 90 seconds. The navigation officer reported, "The Keth cruiser is not changing course." Fleet Commander Vorath appears committed to his bombardment run. Yoon nodded slowly. Vorath had decided that if he could not win, he would at least inflict maximum damage before the end. It was the logic of a creature who valued pride over life, revenge over reason. She had seen his type before among her own species, and she found them equally contemptible, regardless of what world had spawned them. All weapons. "Prepare to fire on my command," Yoon ordered. "We hit him with everything we have left, and we do not stop until one of us breaks." The Resolve's remaining weapon systems were minimal. Most had been destroyed or depleted in the previous hours of combat, but the ship still had mass and momentum, and those were weapons that could not be exhausted. The 2 vessels closed the distance with terrible speed, neither willing to deviate from their collision course. Vorath fired first, his cruiser unleashing a barrage that would have vaporized any normal target. The Resolve took the hits and kept coming, armor plates flying away into space, entire sections of the hull tearing open to vacuum, but the core of the ship remaining intact. Yoon felt the deck shudder beneath her feet and heard the screaming of metal under stress that exceeded every engineering specification. She thought about the people on the Velthrani orbital stations, the civilians who were going about their daily lives, trusting that someone would protect them. She thought about her crew, who had followed her into this impossible situation without a single word of complaint. She thought about what it meant to be human, to be part of a species that had crawled out of a death world and learned to care about something beyond survival. "Fire everything," she commanded. The Resolve's last weapon spoke, and the Keth cruiser shuddered under the impact. But Vorath's ship was still intact, still functional, still close enough to destroy everything Yoon had come here to protect. Then the cruiser's engine section exploded. Yoon stared at the tactical display in confusion as the Keth vessel began breaking apart. Secondary explosions rippling through its hull as systems overloaded and containment fields failed. "What happened?" she demanded. "Admiral," the sensor officer reported with amazement coloring her voice. "Lieutenant Park Jin-ho's squadron. They were hiding in our debris field when the Keth focused on us. They slipped behind the cruiser and targeted the engine exhaust ports. Direct hits to all 3 main drives." Yoon laughed, the sound surprising even herself. Park Jin-ho, the pilot who had survived a deliberate collision with a destroyer, had apparently recovered enough to climb back into a fighter and rejoin the battle. He had seen the Admiral's desperate gambit and had found a way to improve the odds. That was humanity in a single moment. She realized not just the willingness to sacrifice, but the stubborn refusal to accept that sacrifice as inevitable. The Keth cruiser drifted without power. Its bombardment run ended forever. Vorath's escape pod was recovered an hour later, and the fleet commander was taken prisoner with the remainder of his crew. The battle for the Velthrani system was over. The human fleet had lost 11 ships and over 4,000 personnel. Dozens more vessels required extensive repairs, and the medical facilities were overwhelmed with wounded from both sides. But the Velthrani homeworld was safe, its orbital stations intact, its 12 billion citizens still alive because strangers from a death world had decided their lives were worth protecting. Ambassador Tyrell came aboard the crippled Resolve 3 days later. Walking through corridors that still bore the marks of battle, he saw human engineers working around the clock to repair systems that should have been beyond salvation. He saw wounded soldiers helping each other, sharing supplies and support with the casual ease of beings who had faced death together. He saw Keth prisoners being treated in human medical bays, their injuries addressed with the same care given to human casualties. Admiral Yoon met him in what remained of her command center, her arm in a sling and exhaustion carved deep into her features. "Ambassador Tyrell," she said with a smile that reached her tired eyes, "I hope you bring good news from the High Council." Tyrell bowed in the formal style of his people, a gesture of respect that he had never offered to any being outside his own species. "The Council wishes to express gratitude beyond any words our language possesses. You and your people have given us our future. We wish to discuss how we might repay this debt." Yoon shook her head. "There is no debt, Ambassador. We did what was right. Payment was never part of the equation. But there must be something." Tyrell insisted. "Trade agreements, territorial concessions, resources. Your people have sacrificed so much. We cannot simply accept this gift without giving something in return." The Admiral considered his words for a long moment. "There is one thing," she admitted finally. "When your people have recovered, when your civilization has rebuilt and grown strong again, I want you to remember what happened here, not as an obligation, but as an example. Somewhere in this galaxy, there are other species facing threats they cannot overcome alone. Species who are calling for help and receiving only silence. Find them, Ambassador. Help them the way we helped you. Pass on what we gave you. And let it spread until no innocent civilization ever has to face extinction alone." Tyrell felt understanding dawn with the force of revelation. The humans had not come to create allies or establish dominance or claim territory. They had come to plant a seed, to begin a chain of rescue and protection that could eventually span the entire galaxy. They were trying to make the universe a little less cruel. "One act of courage at a time. We will," Tyrell promised. "The Velthrani will never forget what you have done. And we will honor your example for as long as our civilization exists." Admiral Yoon smiled again. And this time, there was no exhaustion in the expression. "That is all we ever wanted," she said. "Not gratitude, not payment. Just the knowledge that our sacrifice meant something, that the galaxy is a little safer because we were here." The human fleet departed Velthrani space a week later, their ships patched together with determination and engineering miracles as they passed through the outer system. Every communication channel carried the same message from the Velthrani people. A single word repeated in every dialect their species possessed. The word was thank you, but it meant so much more than simple gratitude. It meant hope for a future where strength protected weakness instead of exploiting it. It meant faith that compassion could exist even among beings forged in the crucible of Deathworlders. It meant the beginning of something new. A galaxy where no call for help would ever go unanswered, as long as those who could help were willing to answer high. Counselor Veleth watched the human fleet disappear into faster-than-light travel and felt the bioluminescence beneath her skin pulse with colors her people reserved for the most sacred emotions. The Deathworlders had answered their call, and now the Velthrani had a debt to pay forward, somewhere out in the vast darkness of space. Another desperate species was crying out for salvation. Someday soon, the Velthrani would be the ones to answer. The battle had been raging for 16 hours, and the humans showed no sign of stopping. High Counselor Veleth stood in the observation center of the planetary defense bunker and watched the tactical display with a mixture of horror and wonder. The Keth fleet, once so terrifying in its size and power, was being systematically dismantled by beings who simply refused to accept defeat. "They do not sleep," whispered Minister Toral beside her. "Our analysts have been monitoring their communications. Human crews have been fighting continuously since the engagement began. Their commanders rotate personnel through rest periods of only 4 hours at a time, and some have not rested at all." Veleth had spent her life believing that the Velthrani approach to conflict was the civilized one. Avoid violence when possible. Surrender when necessary. Preserve life above all other considerations. Now she watched creatures who had evolved to endure suffering throw themselves into harm's way to protect strangers. And she wondered if her people had confused wisdom with cowardice. "The Keth flagship is moving. Call down a sensor technician. It appears to be positioning for a direct assault on our orbital stations." The observation center fell silent as the implications became clear. The Keth commander had apparently decided that, if he could not defeat the humans directly, he would strike at the people they had come to protect. Millions of Velthrani civilians lived and worked on those orbital stations, and their defenses had been stripped away in the first hours of the blockade. Admiral Yoon's voice crackled over the communication system. Moments later, all ships. "New priority target. The Keth flagship is moving against civilian infrastructure. We intercept and disable. This is not a request." Veleth watched human warships break from their formations and race toward the Keth flagship, placing themselves between the weapon and its intended victims. The flagship was massive, easily 3 times the size of the largest human vessel, bristling with weapons that could crack planets and protected by shields that had withstood everything thrown at them so far. The humans attacked anyway on the assault carrier Defiance. Commander Beak Mireille gathered her Marine platoon in the launch bay and reviewed the mission parameters one final time. The Admiral had authorized a boarding action against the Keth flagship, a desperate attempt to disable the vessel from within before it could reach firing range of the orbital stations. "Listen carefully," Beak announced to her soldiers. "The Keth evolved on a world similar to ours in gravity and atmosphere, so we will not have environmental advantages inside their ship. They are fast and precise, excellent at ambush tactics and close quarters combat. But they have never fought humans in confined spaces. They do not understand what we are capable of when we have something to protect." The Marines checked their weapons and armor, their faces set with determination that came from understanding exactly what was at stake. These were not professional soldiers fighting for territory or resources. These were human beings willing to die so that innocent aliens might live. The boarding craft launched under heavy fire, and 3 of the 8 vessels were destroyed before reaching the flagship. Beak felt her transport shudder as it breached the hull and burned through into the interior corridors. The airlock opened, and she led her Marines into hell. Keth defenders were waiting, their weapons already firing as the humans emerged. 2 of Beak's soldiers fell in the first seconds, but the rest pressed forward, their heavier frames absorbing damage that would have stopped lighter beings. The fighting was brutal and close, conducted in narrow corridors where the Keth speed advantage was neutralized by human strength and endurance. Beak herself took a plasma burn across her shoulder that seared through armor and into flesh. She kept fighting, her rifle steady in her hands, her voice calm as she directed her soldiers through the maze of enemy corridors. "Push forward," she ordered. "Engineering is 2 sections ahead. We reach the reactor controls, and this ship becomes a floating decoration." The Keth fought with desperate ferocity, understanding that their flagship was the key to their entire campaign. Officers rallied, defenders and set ambush and triggered security systems designed to trap intruders in kill zones. The humans walked through every obstacle, bleeding and burning but never stopping when a Keth warrior finally surrendered, throwing down his weapon and raising his clawed hands in submission. Beak made a decision that would later become legendary among both species. She ordered her medic to treat the enemy soldiers' wounds. The Keth stared in disbelief as a human used precious medical supplies to stop his bleeding and stabilize his injuries. Why? The Keth managed to ask, "You were trying to kill us moments ago." Beak looked at him with eyes that held no hatred, only exhaustion and something that might have been compassion. "Because the fight is over for you," she replied. "You stopped being an enemy and became someone who needed help. That is the only difference that matters." Other Keth soldiers witnessed the exchange, and word began spreading through the flagship. The Deathworlders were not the mindless savages they had been taught to fear. They were something far more complex. Beings capable of tremendous violence, but also tremendous mercy, who drew sharp lines between combatants and casualties. When Beak's Marines finally reached the engineering section, they found the remaining defenders had laid down their weapons. The chief engineer, a grizzled Keth veteran who had served the Dominion for decades, met Beak at the reactor control station. "Your commander," he said slowly. "The Admiral. Will she accept our surrender?" "If you surrender genuinely and completely, yes," Beak answered. "If this is a trick or a delay tactic, we will know, and we will respond accordingly." The engineer looked at the human soldiers surrounding him, their armor scorched and their bodies wounded, but their weapons still ready. He looked at the medics treating fallen Keth warriors with the same care they showed their own injured. He looked at Beak, whose shoulder was burned down to bone, but who stood straight and steady as if pain was simply another obstacle to be ignored. "It is no trick." The engineer decided, "I have served the Dominion my entire life, but I have never served cowards who hide behind civilians. The flagship will power down. Do with us what you will." Beak activated her communication system. "Admiral Yoon, this is Commander Beak. The Keth flagship has surrendered. Engineering is secure, and the reactor is powering down. We have prisoners requiring medical attention." Admiral Yoon's response came quickly. "Outstanding work. Commander, medical and security teams are en route. Get your people patched up. The battle is not over yet. Outside." The Keth fleet was beginning to fragment as news of their flagship's capture spread. Through their communication networks, some ships attempted to flee while others signaled their willingness to negotiate. The fleet commander Varath was not finished. His personal cruiser broke from the defensive formation and accelerated toward the Velthrani homeworld, weapons charging for a bombardment run that would kill millions before anyone could stop him. He had lost the battle, but he would not allow the Deathworlders a clean victory if he could not have this system. He would ensure no one wanted it. The remaining human ships moved to intercept, but they were too far away and too damaged to reach him in time. Admiral Yoon made a decision that would define her legacy. "All hands," she announced across the fleet-wide channel. "The Resolve is moving to intercept the Keth cruiser. We will place ourselves between the enemy and the civilian targets. This is not a suggestion, and I am not asking for volunteers. Everyone on this ship knew the risks when they signed up. Now we prove that we meant every word." The damaged flagship Resolve, already bleeding atmosphere and running on emergency power, accelerated toward a collision course with the Keth cruiser. Every person aboard understood that they were probably going to die, and not one of them asked to leave. Fleet Commander Varath of the Keth. Dominion watched the human ships with growing irritation. These Deathworlders had emerged from their quarantine corner of the galaxy and dared to challenge the might of an empire that had conquered 40 star systems. It was laughable. It was insulting. It was about to become their final mistake. Order the Third. "Attack wing to engage," Varath commanded, his scaled skin shifting colors to display confidence and authority. "Show these primitives what happens when insects challenge predators. His tactical officers exchanged uncertain glances, but obeyed without question. The Keth military did not tolerate hesitation or doubt. And Vorath had risen to his position by crushing both enemies and subordinates who displayed weakness. 30 Keth warships accelerated toward the human formation, their weapons charging with enough firepower to crack the crust of a small moon. The humans did not retreat. They did not maneuver for defensive positions. They advanced directly into the weapons range of the Keth. Attack wing, as if eager for the confrontation. They are either brave or stupid. Vorath muttered, "Signal the attack wing to focus fire on the lead human vessel. Destroy it quickly and break their formation." The first volley of Keth plasma weapons struck the human cruiser with devastating precision. Vorath watched the tactical display expectantly, waiting for the ship to break apart or explode or at least begin venting atmosphere. The human cruiser kept coming. Its hull glowed red from absorbed energy, armor plating bubbling and reforming under the assault. But the ship maintained course and speed without deviation. Secondary systems were clearly damaged. Yet the vessel continued, advancing as if the concentrated firepower of 30 warships was merely an inconvenience. "Impossible," whispered the tactical officer beside Vorath. "Their hull should have breached with the first salvo." "Fire again," Vorath ordered, his confidence wavering for the first time. "All weapons." Continuous bombardment. The Keth warships unleashed everything they had, filling the space between the fleets with enough destructive energy to sterilize a continent. The human cruiser took the punishment and responded. A single projectile launched from the human ship, moving at speeds that Keth sensors could barely track. It struck the lead Keth warship and punched through shields that should have been impenetrable, through armor designed to withstand nuclear detonation, through the reactor core and out the other side. The Keth vessel simply ceased to exist, converted from a fighting ship to expanding debris in less than a heartbeat. Then the rest of the human fleet opened fire. Vorath had studied warfare his entire life. He had commanded fleets against a dozen different species, and had never encountered anything like what happened in the next few minutes. Human ships fought with absolute disregard for their own safety, absorbing damage that would have crippled or destroyed any other vessels while delivering strikes with mechanical precision. Their weapons were not elegant or sophisticated, just massive kinetic projectiles accelerated to terrifying velocities. But they punched through Keth defenses like claws through paper. The third attack wing broke and scattered within the first engagement. 12 ships destroyed outright, 8 more crippled and drifting, the remainder fleeing back toward the main fleet with damage that would take cycles to repair. "Commander," the communications officer called out with fear evident in his voice, "we are receiving a transmission from the human flagship." "Put it through," Vorath demanded, struggling to maintain composure as his tactical display showed the extent of the disaster. The face of a human female appeared on the main screen, and Vorath was struck by how unremarkable she seemed compared to the destruction her forces had just unleashed. She looked tired, perhaps even sad, but her voice carried iron when she spoke. "Fleet Commander Vorath, I am Admiral Yoon Sirin of the United Terran Alliance. You have now witnessed what human ships can do when provoked. I am offering you one final opportunity to withdraw your forces from this system without further bloodshed. We have no quarrel with the Keth people, only with those who threaten the innocent. Leave now, and we will not pursue. Stay, and we will destroy your entire fleet." Vorath felt rage building beneath his scales, hot and blinding. No one spoke to a fleet commander of the Keth Dominion this way. No one offered mercy, as if the Keth were some lesser species begging for survival. "You dare threaten me?" Vorath snarled into the communication channel. "Your ships are damaged. Your numbers are inferior to mine. The Dominion does not bow to primitives who crawled out of a death-trap world. The human admiral did not react with anger or fear. She simply nodded as if his response was expected and disappointing. Very well. Commander, we will finish this the hard way, but I want you to remember something when the end comes. I offered you peace, and you chose war. Whatever happens next is on your conscience, not mine. The transmission ended, and Vorath turned to his tactical staff. All ships, prepare for full engagement. We will show these Deathworlders what true military might looks like. But even as he gave the orders, doubt gnawed at the edges of his certainty. The third attack wing had outnumbered the human response force significantly, and had been equipped with the finest weapons the Dominion could produce. They had been demolished in minutes by ships that refused to die, and crews that seemed to feel no fear in the fighter bays of the human carrier vessel Indomitable. Lieutenant Park Jinho climbed into his strike craft and ran through pre-flight checks with practiced efficiency. His squadron had been assigned to hit the Keth supply ships, the vulnerable logistics vessels that kept the enemy fleet operational. Without supplies, even the mightiest warships became floating coffins. All pilots. This is Squadron Leader Park, he announced over the tactical channel. Our mission is simple but not easy. We hit the supply ships hard and fast, and we do not stop until they are burning. Watch each other's backs, and remember that every vessel we destroy is one less weapon pointed at the people we came here to protect. The fighters launched into the chaos of battle. Small and fast and deadly, Jinho led his squadron through a storm of defensive fire, losing 2 pilots in the first minute, but pressing forward without hesitation. His targeting computer locked onto a massive Keth supply hauler, and he unleashed his weapons with grim satisfaction. The hauler exploded, and Jinho was already banking toward the next target when something slammed into his fighter from behind. Warning lights screamed across his cockpit as systems failed one after another. His engine was gone. His weapons were offline, and his life support was bleeding atmosphere into space. Standard protocol demanded immediate ejection. Instead, Jinho noticed that his maneuvering thrusters were still partially functional ahead of him. 2 Keth destroyers were providing cover for the remaining supply ships. His fighters still had enough mass to cause damage if applied correctly. Squadron, continue the mission, Jinho transmitted calmly. I have one more target. He aimed his crippled fighter at the closest destroyer and pushed the thrusters to maximum. The impact breached the destroyer's fuel storage, triggering a chain reaction that destroyed both warships, and a cascade of fire rescue shuttles found Jinho 3 hours later, still alive in the shattered remnants of his cockpit, kept breathing by emergency systems that had survived against all probability. When medical staff expressed amazement at his survival, he simply asked when he could return to combat. The war was not over, and there was still work to be done. Ambassador Tyrell had never been so terrified in his entire existence. The shuttle carrying him toward the human flagship felt like a coffin traveling through the void, bringing him closer to creatures that evolution had designed for violence and survival against impossible odds. He could see the ship growing larger through the viewport, and everything about it screamed danger. The vessel was called the Resolve, and it looked nothing like any spacecraft Tyrell had ever encountered. Where Velthrani ships were elegant and curved, designed to flow through space with minimal resistance, the human vessel was brutal and angular. Heavy armor plating covered every surface, scored with marks that could only be weapons damage from previous battles. The ship had clearly been hurt before, and it kept fighting. That single observation told Tyrell everything he needed to know about the beings who built it. The shuttle docked with a sound of metal grinding against metal, and Tyrell felt the gravity shift immediately. His thin legs nearly buckled under the crushing force that humans apparently considered normal. 2 human soldiers waited at the airlock, their bodies encased in armor that made them look like machines of war. They were tall, impossibly tall by Velthrani standards, with broad shoulders and thick limbs built for power rather than grace. Their eyes tracked Tyrell with the focused attention of predators assessing prey. "Ambassador Tyrell," one of them said, and even the voice sounded like a weapon. "Admiral Yoon is expecting you. Please follow us." Tyrell followed because he had no other choice. The corridors of the Resolve were wide and functional, built to accommodate beings who moved with purpose rather than elegance. Warning signs in human script covered the walls, and Tyrell noticed that many of them referenced radiation levels and atmospheric conditions that would kill his species within minutes. The humans walked through these hazards without protection, breathing air that contained enough oxygen to corrode Velthrani lungs and shrugging off radiation that would cause cellular breakdown in most galactic species. They truly were Deathworlders. The door to the command center opened, and Tyrell got his first look at Admiral Yoon Siren. She was smaller than the soldiers, but something about her presence filled the room in a way that size could not explain. Her black hair was pulled back from a face that showed lines of experience and eyes that had clearly seen terrible things. When she looked at Tyrell, he expected to see the cold calculation of a predator. Instead, he saw something that confused him entirely. He saw warmth. "Ambassador Tyrell," she said, and her voice carried gentleness he had not anticipated. "Thank you for making this journey. I know our ship must seem frightening to your people." Tyrell struggled to find words while his body fought against the gravity that wanted to press him into the floor. "Admiral Yoon," he managed finally. "The Velthrani High Council extends its deepest gratitude for your response to our call. We did not dare hope that anyone would answer." The Admiral gestured to a chair that looked far too large for Tyrell, but had been modified with supports clearly designed for his smaller frame. Someone had taken time to prepare for his comfort. That small detail struck him more powerfully than any display of military might. "Please sit," she said. "I can see our gravity is difficult for you. We have adjusted this section of the ship to 60% standard Earth gravity. It is the lowest we can safely maintain, but I hope it helps." Tyrell sank into the chair and felt the pressure ease slightly. "You knew we would struggle with your environment," he said with surprise coloring his words. "You prepared for us." "Of course," Admiral Yoon replied, taking a seat across from him. "We are here to help you." "Ambassador, that means understanding your needs and limitations. How can we protect you if we do not first learn what protection means for your species?" The question was so logical, so filled with genuine concern, that Tyrell found his fear beginning to shift into something else. He had expected monsters and found instead beings who thought carefully about the welfare of others. "I must ask," Tyrell said slowly, "why did you come? The Velthrani have nothing to offer your people. We have no military strength, no valuable resources, no strategic importance. Why would Deathworlders travel across the galaxy to fight for strangers who cannot help them in return?" Admiral Yoon was silent for a moment, her eyes distant, as if seeing something far beyond the walls of the command center. "Do you know what Earth was like before humans achieved unity?" she asked. "No," Tyrell admitted. "Our records of your species are limited and mostly classified as dangerous." The Admiral smiled, but there was sadness in the expression. "Humans spent most of our history fighting each other," she explained. "We divided ourselves by borders and beliefs and appearance. We watched the weak suffer and told ourselves it was not our concern. We built walls instead of bridges and celebrated our differences rather than our shared humanity." She leaned forward, and her eyes met Tyrell's with intensity that felt almost physical. "We learned better, Ambassador. We learned that strength without compassion is just cruelty wearing a different mask. We learned that the measure of civilization is not how well it protects the powerful, but how fiercely it defends those who cannot defend themselves. Terrell felt something shifting in his understanding of these beings. But the cost, he protested. Your ships, your soldiers, your resources. The Keth are not weak opponents. Your people will die protecting us. Yes. Admiral Yoon agreed simply. Some of us will die. That is the price of doing what is right. We accept that price willingly, Ambassador, because we remember what it was like to be alone and afraid and waiting for help that never came. We remember. And we refuse to let others experience that despair if we have the power to prevent it. A communication officer approached and handed the Admiral a datapad. She read it quickly, and her expression hardened. The Keth commander has refused our withdrawal demand, she announced. He apparently believes we are bluffing. Are you? Terrell asked. Though he already suspected the answer, Admiral Yoon stood and moved to the main display, which showed the positions of both fleets. Ambassador, I want you to return to your homeworld and deliver a message to your High Council. Tell them to prepare their medical facilities and emergency shelters. Not because we will fail, but because even victory has consequences. Tell them that the Deathworlders of Earth have come to fight for them and that we do not stop until the job is done. She turned to face him one final time and tell them something else. Ambassador, tell them that they are no longer alone, whatever happens next. Humanity stands with the Velthrani. That is a promise we will keep with our last breath if necessary. Terrell rose from his chair on unsteady legs. He had come to this ship expecting to negotiate with monsters. He was leaving with the knowledge that humanity was something far more complex and far more wonderful than his people had ever imagined. As his shuttle departed the Resolve, he looked back at the human fleet and saw not instruments of destruction, but shields raised in defense of those who could not protect themselves. The Deathworlders had answered their call, and the galaxy would never be the same. The council chamber fell silent as the last offensive satellite disappeared from the tactical display in a flash of orange light. High Counselor Valeth pressed her thin fingers against the cold surface of the command table and watched her world's final protection crumble into debris. Around her stood the 7 remaining members of the Velthrani High Council, their translucent skin flickering with the pale blue bioluminescence that signaled deep fear among their kind. That was the last one, whispered Defense Minister Toral, his voice trembling like wind through hollow reeds. The Keth Dominion had arrived 3 cycles ago with a fleet of 200 warships. The Velthrani had 47 defense vessels, most of them outdated patrol craft designed for asteroid monitoring rather than actual combat. Those 47 ships now existed only as scattered wreckage orbiting their homeworld like a ring of broken promises. Councilor Nivre stepped forward, her elongated limbs moving with the careful grace their low gravity species had developed over millions of years. The Keth commander has sent another transmission, she said quietly. He demands our complete surrender within 6 planetary rotations, or he will begin bombardment of civilian centers. Valeth closed her 4 eyes and felt the weight of 12 billion lives pressing down upon her narrow shoulders. The Velthrani were not warriors. They had never been warriors. Their civilization had grown in peace, developing art and philosophy and medicine while other species built weapons and conquered territories. They had believed that the galaxy would respect their neutrality, their commitment to harming no one. They had been fools. What options remained to us? Valeth asked, though she already knew the answer would bring no comfort. Minister Toral manipulated the tactical display with shaking hands. We could attempt evacuation of essential personnel to the outer colonies, but the Keth have positioned interdiction ships along every viable escape route. And our allies? Councillor Yiveth asked with desperate hope coloring his words. The Meridian Assembly has expressed deep concern. Nivri replied bitterly. The cooperation of United Systems has called for an emergency session to discuss potential sanctions. So they send words while the Keth prepare to burn our cities. Velith said she turned away from the display and walked to the great window that overlooked the capital city of Velthros below her. Millions of her people continued their daily lives, trusting that their leaders would find a solution. Children attended learning centers and workers tended the crystalline gardens, and artists created beauty that might soon exist only as ash. There is one other possibility, spoke a voice from the shadows at the edge of the chamber. Everyone turned to see Scholar Kethmira emerge from the darkness. Her ancient form bent with age, but her mind still sharp, as starlight Kethmira had lived for over 400 cycles. Longer than any other Velthrani in recorded history, she carried knowledge that most considered myth and legend. Speak, Elder, Velith said with respect. That bordered on reverence. Kethmira moved slowly to the tactical display and began manipulating controls with fingers that remembered technologies long forgotten. The star map shifted and expanded, moving past known space, past the territories of familiar species, until it reached a sector marked with warning symbols in 17 different languages, the restricted zone. Toril breathed with horror, filling his voice. You cannot be serious. I am entirely serious. Kethmira replied calmly. Within that quarantined sector exists a world called Earth, home to a species that the galactic community has tried very hard to forget. Deathworlders, Nivre said. And the word carried centuries of fear and propaganda. Savages who evolved on a planet of poison and violence. That is what we have been told. Kethmira agreed, but I have studied the actual records, not the sanitized versions distributed by species who fear competition. She brought up data files that looked impossibly old. Humans, they call themselves. They come from a world with crushing gravity, an atmosphere filled with corrosive oxygen and weather patterns that would destroy our cities in hours. They survive diseases that would end our entire species and consume substances that would kill us with a single taste. And they have been watching the galaxy, waiting for someone to give them a reason to emerge. Velith studied the information scrolling across the display. The humans looked terrifying, with their forward-facing predator eyes and their bodies built for endurance hunting, but something in the data caught her attention. These records indicate that humans have a concept called compassion. She said slowly, they apparently feel compelled to protect those weaker than themselves. Propaganda to make them seem less threatening. Toril argued, or perhaps truth that makes them more complex than our fears allow us to imagine. Kethmira countered, the question before this council is simple. Do we surrender to certain death, or do we reach out to uncertain salvation? Velith looked at each council member in turn. She saw fear in every face. But beneath that fear, she saw something else. She saw the desperate need to believe that someone in this vast and uncaring galaxy might actually help them. Prepare a transmission, she ordered. Use every frequency we can access. Broadcast toward the restricted sector with everything we have. What message do we send? Nivre asked. Velith considered the question carefully. The Velthrani had nothing to offer beings who could survive Deathworld conditions. They had no military strength, no strategic resources, no leverage of any kind. All they had was need. We tell them the truth. Velith decided, we are dying and we need help. We will give anything. Please save us. The transmission was sent within the hour. A desperate cry flung into the darkness to warn monsters that might prove worse than the enemies already at their door. For 3 agonizing days, there was only silence. The Keth commander grew impatient and destroyed a small mining colony on the 4th moon as a demonstration of his seriousness. 40,000 Velthrani died in nuclear fire while the galaxy watched and issued statements of grave concern. Then, on the fourth day, something happened. Every sensor array in the system detected the same impossible reading faster than light signatures appeared at the edge of Velthrani space. Not one or two ships, but hundreds of them, each one radiating power levels that made the Keth fleet look like children playing with toys. A message arrived on all frequencies, broadcast in crude but understandable galactic standard. The voice was firm and carried absolute confidence. This is Admiral Yoon Sirin of the United Terran Alliance 1st Expeditionary Fleet. The message declared, "We received your distress call. Someone asked for help, and we answer. To the Keth Dominion forces currently threatening Velthrani civilians. You have one standard cycle to withdraw from this system. Fail to comply, and we will remove you ourselves. This is not a negotiation." Veleth stood at the window and watched the distant flashes of human ships taking position between her world and the Keth Armada for the first time in cycles. The bioluminescence beneath her skin shifted from fear blue to something she barely recognized, hope.